So the bigger the sample size, meaning the number of individuals that you have within a specific group, the more likely the result will have what we call statistical significance. A statistical significance is a measure of confidence that the results obtained are real, rather than due to random chance. Again, we're going back to the example of flipping a coin. We know, because this has been done, multiple times. We've done, many times. We know that if you flip a coin a specific number of times, you're going to get about 50% heads and about 50% tails. So if you should try this at your home. Try to flip a coin, like say 2,000 times, and record how many times it lands on heads and how many times it lands on tails. So you must have a large sample size in your specific experiment. So after you carry your experiments, after you have analyzed the data, then the last step is basically to publish your experiments in peer-reviewed scientific journals. This is the last step, and this is crucial as well. Again, the important part about peer-reviewed publications is that they're sent to a journal, and that journal is going to send it to other scientists that are experts within your field. They're going to read your paper, and they're going to determine whether they're going to publish your study as it is, or perhaps they have additional questions, and they want you to do an additional experiment. The important part about the peer review process is that it ensures that only the best experiments get to be published. Therefore, it increases the confidence that your study was done correctly. As I mentioned before, we never say that your hypotheses were correct. We only say that the results support your hypothesis. And the reason for that is because science is evolving. We're coming up with better equipment, better ways to test the hypothesis. So a hypothesis that continues to be held after many years, after rigorous testing, may eventually be considered a scientific theory. So a scientific theory is a hypothesis that has been tested many times, and the results of those tests, those experiments, continue to support the hypothesis. Some examples of scientific theories is the cell theory, which means that all living organisms are made out of cells. Also, the theory of general relativity, which states that gravity influences time and space. Or the theory of evolution by natural selection. Populations of organisms change over time, adapting to their environment. So those are examples of scientific theories that have been tested over and over again, and the results support that hypothesis. So it eventually became a scientific theory. Now, we also have to be careful, we as consumers. There could be benefits to drinking caffeinated coffee. However, we also know there's also some side effects to increasing the consumption of drinking coffee, such as, for example, we know that it has effects on the nervous system, such as, for example, a person becomes irritability, nervousness, increases anxiety and depression, increases headaches, and increases insomnia. We know that after you drink coffee, because you are basically alert, right? It's really hard to fall asleep. So there's also several effects when it comes to drinking coffee, and you as a consumer, you as a person, must be aware of these effects. Observing patterns can show a consistent relationship or link between two variables. Correlation is a consistent relationship between two variables. However, you have to be cautious because correlation between two variables does not prove that one variable causes the other. And a silly example is, we know that during the summer, there is an increase in the amount of crimes that are committed. We also know that during the summer, there's also an increase in the amount of ice cream consumption. So does that mean that what's causing an increase in the amount of crimes that is committed is that increase in ice cream consumption? No, they're basically not related whatsoever. So again, correlation between two variables does not prove that one variable causes the other. So you have to be very cautious. So could there be a relation between coffee drinking and the incidence of Parkinson's disease? Could drinking coffee prove to be beneficial in perhaps preventing the incidence of Parkinson's disease? So that is a question that we're trying to answer. So based on observations, one of the things that it was noted is that coffee drinkers had a lower incidence of Parkinson's disease. Could drinking coffee be beneficial in preventing Parkinson's disease? Now you have to be very cautious here, okay? Because remember, correlation is not causation. So we have to be extremely careful about making a specific statement. It could be beneficial, or they could not be related whatsoever. You have to be very carefully whenever you're evaluating epidemiology results. It's hard to control for complexity of disease because we know that genetics plays a huge role in determining which individuals are going to get a specific disease. Also, you also have a small sample size. If you remember, as you increase the sample size, your confidence also increases. So you have to be very cautious. Now use a non-correlation to design a control experiment. You conduct what are called randomized clinical trials, which basically you randomly choose subjects either to be in the control group and experimental group, and then you give them the different treatments in order to determine, right, if drinking coffee it's beneficial to preventing Parkinson's disease. Again, you have to be cautious, right? However, a correlation it's a starting point. From there, you can design an experiment in order to determine, like in this particular example, if drinking coffee it's beneficial in preventing Parkinson's disease. We were designing an experiment to test the beneficial aspects of drinking coffee in preventing Parkinson's disease. What we would do is design a carefully experiment. So in which the experimental group are going to drink coffee and the control group drinks something similar to what the experimental group is drinking, like say for example, decaf or something like that. So you're going to follow both groups for a number of years to see which one has the higher incidence of a specific disease that you are looking at. So in this particular example, they're using Parkinson's disease. Again, you basically design an experiment in which you have an experimental group. An experimental group is going to get the treatment, in this particular case, drinking caffeinated coffee, and the control group is going to get a similar treatment. However, it shouldn't have an effect. In this particular case, you have decaf. So you're going to follow both groups for a number of years to see which one has the higher incidence or a specific disease that you're looking at. Now you have to be very careful whenever you're getting information, because a lot of times when you read basically peer-reviewed journals, you're gonna see that they're very complex. I mean, to be honest with you, they're hard to read. And so a lot of times what happens is that a person is only gonna get a specific set, specific thing from that experiment, and they're gonna say, oh, like drinking coffee it's beneficial to preventing Parkinson's disease. Well, there's also other consequences of drinking coffee, right? All the other side effects that you can see. So you have to be very careful. It is our job, right, as consumers, in order to become informed, we need to do our own research, and we have to come up with our own conclusions. You take whatever information they're giving you with a grain of salt. Make sure you always go back to wherever they got that information. Because a lot of times, again, what happens is that peer-reviewed journals are complex. They're very difficult to read. And so what a person does is just grab little bits and pieces, right? They only give you only a specific information. So you have to be very careful. Once again, just basically to let you know that all of us, not only journalists, not only scientists, but also us, we as consumers, we as everyday citizens, we need to become knowledgeable of how science is done. Just because you read something on a newspaper, right? And take things with a grain of salt. You also just need to go back to where they actually get that information in order for you to determine your own conclusions. All of us are responsible, right, for ensuring that whatever is published, whatever is done, is as accurate as possible. The last thing that I want to talk about in this specific chapter is graphs. So after you carry your experiments, after you analyze the data, then you want to display your results. And you often do this by using graphs, and there can be different types of graphs. So what goes in what section? So typically on the x-axis, you're gonna put your independent variable. And if you remember, the independent variable, it's the one that you as a scientist, it's the one that you're changing. An example would be like different amounts of coffee. On the y-axis, it's where you put the dependent variable. And if you remember, the dependent variable is the outcomes of your study. It's whatever you're measuring. A graph must also have a title. And the title has to be descriptive of what you're trying to show. Once again, on the x-axis, you put your independent variable. So that's the one that you're changing. On the y-axis, you put your dependent variable. So another term for dependent variable, it's the outcomes, it's the result of your study. Summarize what we talk in this chapter. Science is an ongoing process in which scientists conduct carefully designed studies to answer questions in the form of hypotheses. Scientific hypotheses are tested in controlled experiments or in observational studies, and the results of which can support or reject your hypothesis. Scientific hypotheses can be supported by data but cannot be proven absolutely to be correct. Again, the reason for that is because any future studies might provide new evidence, and at that point, your hypothesis might be rejected. So we never state your hypothesis is correct.